the memory that stands out the most to me is like, we stopped and there was a dead agave, and he intentionally stopped and spent quite a bit of time telling us about how beautiful this agave was and how it was like the most beautiful agave in the row, like in the estate that they had. And that's why they let it die.
It's the people, it's the places, it's the memories. But for me, it's a lot about like the history and the indigenous roots that it has, its sort of history as a product that symbolizes resistance.
Or like my favorite thing is like when you pour a mezcal for somebody and they're like, this reminds me of like my grandma's house, right? Or some memory, right? It's like that connection point. What is it drawing you back to that I think makes these spirits so special, and why I keep coming back to them, and I think that they're worthy of protection.
Speaking of which, what am I drinking? I think any brand that's not doing sales in Mexico is essentially engaging in cultural appropriation. But not with the label, right? It's like the mezcalito on the side of the road.
Right.
Like, does that count?
Right, because isn't that true of like Agua de Sol, right? Like, and I'm not trying to like call specific out, but like, you guys sell in Mexico, the brand sells in Mexico as the brand, or like it does?
Yeah.
Bottles.
Correct.
With the tax sticker.
Now, currently, yes. But so did you know that they did sales sort of on the down low previously?
Yeah, because I one time the importer came in and like did this class, and he told me that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's true. And you know that it's interesting because, you know,
but for the conversation of appropriation, appreciation doesn't matter.
Taxes in, you know, for selling mezcal in Mexico are through the nose.
Sure.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
I think they're about 70% of your costs.
Yeah.
Of goods sold, right? So,
and where does that money go? Does it come back to the producers in the community?
I'm sure. Obviously not, dude.
That's appropriation right there.
So appropriation of the mezcal culture by the Mexican government.
Absolutely.
There's a thesis for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
I'm going back to school.
Are they participating?
Who's that? The government? I mean, the Comercam is.
Sure. They're participating in the taxing of the product, right?
So well, in the certification of the
and the certification, right? The preservation of the Norma Mexicana for mezcal, right? But like the taxes that are, and this is a question I don't know the answer to, right? Like genuinely curious. The tax revenue that's brought in through certified mezcal, where does it go? Like,
I'll ask my cousin.
Right? Like, I'm curious. Yeah. Let me know if you find out, right? Because like, where does it go? Does it go to like fund some general fund? Does it go to like specific programs? Is it directed mostly back to communities within the denomination of origin for mezcal? Is it sent to line someone's pocket in Mexico City? Like,
ding, 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 ding. Well, salud.
Salud.
You know, obviously I don't have the answer, but
yeah, it's food for thought, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna make a note to ask my cousin. He actually used to work for the SAT, and I don't know that he knows the answer, but he can probably find out. So again, I think any brand that's not doing sales in Mexico is essentially engaging in cultural appropriation.
Sure. And it's a pretty provocative statement. So like, what about owning a brand of agave spirits and not selling in Mexico crosses the line of what you feel is cultural appropriation? Like, I'm really curious to get to that, like, underlying thought behind that statement.
What about it makes it cultural appropriation?
Yeah, like, what is wrong with having a brand that doesn't do sales in Mexico? Like, what is inherently wrong about that, or inherently appropriation to you, to be able to make that like broad stroke claim? You know,
I believe it's exploitative. You're literally taking resources and a Mexican patrimony, right? This culture of agave spirits, and exporting the product without leaving any access to the people that created the product.
Yeah. And so where do we draw the line? Like, if a brand produces mezcal and exports some of it, but also does some domestic sales, like, and 99% of their sales are exported sales and 1% of their sales are domestic sales, does that count? Does that count as like, okay, you're no longer appropriating mezcal? Or are we looking for like a more substantial part of their sales to come from domestic sales in Mexico?
Look, personally, at the end of the day, I think it's about intention,
Sure.
right, on the brand owner's part. But if we're trying to, define cultural appropriation in the context of agave spirits, then I have to argue that even that 1%, symbolic as it may be, does lend them the credibility, the authenticity to say that this is a product that belongs to Mexicans first.
Sure. But unfortunately, the Mexican government makes it pretty hard to sell product in Mexico, right?
What do you mean hard? Like,
Well,
expensive?
It's expensive. No?
It is expensive.
Like if we're in Oaxaca City and we go down to a local liquor store, like we're gonna find bottles of imported whiskey that are cheaper than bottles of mezcal made in Oaxaca.
Yeah.
That's insane, right?
It is insane. Absolutely. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. I feel like I've heard that somewhere. It's true. I mean, so my understanding is that between, I think, 3 different sets of tax collectors, that a brand owner pays upwards of 70% of their cost of goods sold to the Mexican government for, different taxes. I think it's the IVA, added. So that's an added value tax. There's the IEPS, which is like a tax on like anything that's not good for your health, like liquor, cigarettes.
A sin tax.
A sin tax, exactly. And then another 1%, actually, I made a note of it, an impuesto especial, an ISR tax. So altogether, 70%. I mean, I think that's insane. Certainly not what we have in the US, but again.
So then even brands that are trying to be intentional about their efforts to make the product available to the community in which it originates hit these roadblocks.
I don't know that it's a roadblock. It's expensive, like I said, but
so the taxes are pricing potentially the community out of accessing those products too, right?
Look, there's these. It depends on the size of the company and the brand, right? But if we're talking about a multinational company that has, the funds to market a brand across the U.S., then I think that they can allocate even 1% of that budget to doing sales in Mexico as a symbolic gesture for, the purpose of saying that they are participating in and with that culture. Actually, so I meant to reference along with, that statement that there's a thought leader, I would call him, Cornelio Perez. Do you know who that is?
No.
So he founded a group called the Logia de Mezcolotras. And essentially he says, he sort of lays out a framework for what constitutes mezcal traditional mezcal. And so among those are a term called gusto histórico. You've heard this. And so that roughly translates as a sort of local proofing that whereby a mezcalero sells his mezcal locally to the public, and there's feedback, provided back to the mezcalero by his neighbors, right, by his customers, as to whether it was, too hot, too funky, too acidic, too, X, right, you name it. And little by little, they'll take all that feedback and slowly but surely adjust their production methods to the local palate, right? And what their neighbors like and want. To me, like, that is the true meaning of engaging with the tradition and the community for the purpose of, what I think of as a very artisanal, traditional product. Now, that's not how I'm defining, what's necessary for, a brand not to be appropriating the culture. But like, at its best, yeah, that's how a brand should do it, is the way that it was sort of done traditionally.
Yeah. I think you bring up really valid points, right? Like, in the best case scenario, the local community has access to these products, right? And I feel like it's not just black and white in terms of like, you don't sell any product in Mexico, you're appropriating the culture. For me, like, this industry has so much gray area. And so for me, there's like the gray area, and it really, to me, is like, what is the intention of the brand or the brand owner in terms of how they go about selling their product and where their profits go and different things like that, right? Because you can have the best intentions, right? I've talked to not producers, but brand owners, right, who hit roadblocks when it comes to selling their product in Mexico, right? Because it's not easy. And just because it's not easy, that's not a valid excuse not to do it, right? But there's real roadblocks in place in terms of taxes and otherwise to sell your product in Mexico. And it's also a smaller market to sell agave spirits in than the United States or some of these other countries, right? And so I'm less concerned with whether 1% of your sales occur in Mexico or not. I'm more concerned with what your intention is by owning this brand, and what are you doing to give back to the community where this product is produced, right?
Yeah. So I absolutely think that there's gray area.
You can have sales in Mexico and not give two shits about the community that's producing for you.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's definitely this gray area, and
it's still appropriation. You're still exploiting the local community, and taking more than you're giving back.
Sure. So I think that's a good point, and it's it's not black and white, but I think that is sort of my marker, because it allows us to differentiate between, or at least approximate, right, to brands that are at least working toward a less exploitative model, right? And it's a signal, right? And even though there may not be the best of intentions, I think the opposite is also true, whereby a brand that is Mexican owned but only exports may, I don't know what to call this, but like culture wash, right, the brand in a way. So market it in a way so that it feels very traditional. They might be interviewing producers and telling a profound story. But if they're not selling in Mexico, their real intention is to maximize profits, essentially, right? And that's exploitative. Even though they're Mexican, even though they're telling a beautiful story about the producer. My point is about accountability, and so that's the one question that I've been able to ask that cuts across the idea of intention.
Right. But I mean, producers have been looking to and exporting their products of agave spirits, tequila, mezcal, and otherwise since long before we even had denominations of origin for these spirits. and DOs and certifications of this is tequila, this is mezcal, this is whatever. And so it's interesting, right? Because we know in some communities, mezcal is more of something that is shared, or used as a currency to trade, or really part of a tradition. But you go back even well before DOs, and there was a commercial aspect to mezcal in certain communities.
Yeah.
Right? And this idea that, like, hey, we know the people up north will buy our product, right? And so this, like, exportation is not new. And so where do the brands today that are only exporting, or a distillery who only produces brands for American-owned or Australian-owned brands, right? They only produce tequila or mezcal for those brands. How does that come into preserving the culture of mezcal, right? Which I think really what I'm trying to get at is, like, what is the culture of mezcal? And why is it worth protecting? Like, I think I will put the disclaimer out that, like, I believe it's worth protecting, but I think it's a good conversation for us to have.
Mm-hmm. No, I think, to me, there's like the idea of mezcal as a form of resistance, right? That is the culture of agave spirits and mezcal specifically. And resisting, when I say resistance, I mean resisting appropriation, sure. In one respect, but also resisting the taxes, by the government. In historically speaking, that's quote unquote government, it was really these multinationals sort of usurping local power, right, to tax mezcal producers, and participating in that sort of resistance vis-a-vis local sales, I think, is what lends some of that authenticity to a brand. So you asked the question, is Agua Sol, legitimately sold in Mexico?
Yeah.
I say, what does that matter, really? Like, the point,
whether it's legit, like a tax stamp on it, sold in Mexico
or not. The point is, we're making that effort so that we're providing that access at the very best price, sure. To not just the producing community, but to the Mexican community.
Yeah.
So for me, it's
and if you have economic impact, right? So a brand is producing in Mexico and not having domestic sales in Mexico, but let's say this is, for example, right? We're not talking about a specific brand, but they are employing people at the distillery. They're employing with living wages in Mexico. They're paying them well, right? But not selling in Mexico. Do you think that there's still a distinction there, that it's because they're not making the actual product available to the local community, that is where you're kind of drawing the line and saying, like, this isn't okay?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right, because the two aren't mutually exclusive, right? Like, you can do both. You can both employ as many people as you're able, sure. Creating jobs, paying fair living wages, doing production, quote unquote, the right way, and also doing sales in Mexico, making sure that Mexicans have access to. There's just no reason not to. I mean, there's roadblocks, yes, but I can think of another brand that I won't name, but no, they do a great job in profit sharing, in paying producers a fair wage, and then also giving back to those producers a percent of proceeds. And I think that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, that brand has one owner. And if that owner is not Mexican, then those profits are not staying in the country, right?
His profits or their profits.
Their profits.
Yeah.
right, their profits are not staying in the country. We're on the other hand, if it's a Mexican-owned brand that is selling their brand in Mexico, then those profits are spent and reinvested locally.
Sure.
Theoretically. Yeah. Theoretically.
Right. And I think there's then a distinction of how important is it for a brand to be owned by a Mexican national versus a foreigner whether they're American or otherwise. Should that make a difference in whether we choose to support that brand or not, or whether we choose to buy that product?
Yeah, again, it doesn't matter if they're, at least in my opinion, it doesn't matter if they're Mexican or not. It matters more what exactly they're doing with the brand and with their profits.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because
but how do you get to that, right? And that's why I was, saying blockchain.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it comes down to intention, right? And cultural appropriation, I feel like, can be a bit of a buzzword these days too, right? In terms of people have very strong reactions to accusations of cultural appropriation, either trying to hold people accountable and being on the side that is saying, yes, you're appropriating culture, or being on the opposite side and being defensive of actions of a multinational brand or an individual or whatever that might be. And so for me, it's about intention. And I don't think we can draw lines in the sand of Mexican owned versus not Mexican owned, right? Good versus bad. And it's there's so much gray area involved in that. And cultural appropriation doesn't have to be intentional. And I think it doesn't have to be intentional. And I think sometimes it's not intentional. But cultural humility and cultural appreciation, that does have to be intentional, right? And so I think...
But so does selling in Mexico, right? And that,
sure, if we're considering that part of appreciating the culture of Mezcal or
why wouldn't it be?
No, I'm saying that has to be intentional.
It absolutely does.
Sure.
And I guess I forget what I was going to say. Que Penca. So I guess for me, it's really tough for a consumer, albeit for someone that's engaged in the business of mezcal distribution. I would argue it's impossible practically to get at a brand's intention, right? They can tell you whatever they want, right? But I think a real marker that we can as consumers use to make a determination is that decision about whether or not a brand chooses to do sales in Mexico.
Yeah, I think for me, I just where my concern is it's not black and white, at least for me, right? And so I challenge consumers, I challenge us, I challenge myself to seek out more information, right? To be a more educated consumer. We know the new generation of drinkers, right, cares more about what they're drinking than ever before, right?
Yeah.
And so my challenge is to them and to the current generation of drinkers and the past generation of drinkers, anybody currently drinking, right? Seek out the information, ask the questions, and you're gonna have to make a personal decision about who you choose to support by what you're drinking, what you're ordering at a bar, which bottle you're buying off of a shelf. And that's your decision to make, right, as an individual consumer. But know that your decision has real impacts for the environment, for the community, and the culture of mezcal as a whole, right? And so be intentional with that, right? Because like I said, that cultural humility has to be intentional. And it starts, we can only control our own actions. So as a consumer, it starts with us, right? am I being intentional about the products that I choose to buy and I choose to drink and I choose to talk about with whatever platform I might have, right? Because if I'm not, shame on me. Because yeah, a multinational corporation does this, a Mexican-owned brand does this, an American-owned brand does this. They're exploiting the culture, they're appreciating the culture, but what am I doing as an individual? That's like a self-reflection for me, right? Like as we're having this conversation, it's like, what am I doing, and am I being intentional about what I choose to support and what I choose to drink? And I should be, right? There's not gonna we're never gonna publish a list of like confirmed non-appropriating brands of agave spirits, right? Like
Oh, that's a good question for our influencer friends.
I'm waiting for that list to come out, right?
Yeah.
These brands don't appropriate the culture of mezcal, right? And it's not going to happen. It's an individual decision that we have to make as consumers, right? And how do we make better decisions is by seeking out more information and being intentional about what we support.
Speaking of which, what am I drinking?
I brought a bottle for you because today's topic, right? Appreciation, appropriation, cultural exchange. When we're talking about agave spirits as a whole, there's conversations to be had in both the spheres of what we know as legally mezcal, what we know as legally tequila, and everything else in between. And so I thought that I would bring you a mezcal that kind of crosses those and has that same intersectionality. Okay. So this is a mezcal produced in Miahuatlan by Victor Ramos that is made with tequilana, Blue Weber agave.
Nice. Wow. I would not have guessed that. Right, cool. So
yeah. Can you find the Mexican tax stamp on that?
Actually, now that you mention it, I recognize the handwriting.
A good friend. What am I drinking?
So I chose something for you that I thought was just a beautiful spirit. It
had a feeling.
Yeah. So something that I'm not as familiar with. It's a blend of three agaves. It is I think it's an angustifolia. I think that's the Rolicanta and then a Bruto. This is from Miguel Ángel Partida or his dad, I want to say. Don Macario Partida. Yeah, and this is from 2014. This is batch 1.
Thank you for sharing this with me.
Yeah.
This has that Chacolo DNA in it, right? Like when I was tasting it, I was like, this tastes a little familiar. And I'll tell you why this is so special for me. Because in my own journey of learning about agave spirits and falling in love with agave spirits, Chacolo was one of the first producers I ever visited.
Cool.
Yeah. So I went on a trip and I visited tequila producers in the Valley of Tequila. And after we visited tequila producers in the Valley of Tequila, we then went west to Mascota and visited raicilla producers in Western Jalisco. And then we made it back to Guadalajara and woke up early the next day and drove all the way out to Zapotitlán de Varillo and visited Chacolo. And so to me, it's my first ever mezcal palenque that I've ever visited. And so it kind of holds that special place in my heart in terms of like the journey of what was to come, what is to come.
Why? So I chose that for you because I remember finding it. So I bought that actually directly from Ulises Torrentera in Oaxaca. And what's funny about it is that I didn't know what I was buying, but I recognized the label as an old iteration of the brand Chacolo. But when I got home and I looked more closely at the label, I recognized the name of that producer. And I went back to some of the notes I had taken. And I realized that was, sort of, not sort of, but that was Macario Partida was the person that I sort of associated with being basically the first producer, at least that I learned about, who was doing agave cultivation by individual species intentionally. Whereas I think until then I had just given that credit I think by default to folks in Oaxaca.
Sure.
Found it very interesting.
Yeah. It's delicious. It's such a treat. Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is excellent too. I don't have the pleasure of knowing Victor Ramos, but bit infamous.
Infamous. There you go. Yeah.
Victor what? What do they call him again?
I don't know. What are you talking about?
Oh, Victor fucking Ramos.
Oh, Victor fucking Ramos.
Yeah.
Ah. So I'll tell you what, when you were drinking this, like before you found out what it was, like what was going through your head? Like, did you have any indication that this was like tequilana?
Well, no, absolutely not. I would have guessed Mexicano.
Okay.
It's got the Miahuatlan
Absolutely. Yeah.
to it. So I knew Oaxaca, I knew Miahuatlan, and I would have guessed Ruracanta. Yeah, it's sweet. Very sweet, very like potting soil, kind of wet earth notes to it. It's tasty. The finish is nice and long.
Oh.
I like it. It's not too hot. 48. At least that's what the bottle said. That's what the Sharpie said.
Approximately.
Yeah, that's what the Sharpie
Check the
said.
perlas.
No, I might let me get on it. What's this at?
This one? Let's see. 48.8.
Not bad. So you met Macario and Miguel too?
Only Miguel.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, met Miguel when I went to visit with Chacolo, right? At the, to see the production, and he kind of gave us the tour. And it was funny because we were like walking through the agave fields. And, he's talking about all of these different agaves. Like, this is Ixtero Amarillo. This is Azul Teo Cruz. This is...
That's exactly what this is.
Brocha. Right. Like,
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm like,
This is like the classic blend then.
yeah, the different agaves, right? So like they basically, almost every agave that they're cultivating, or at least from my recollection, right, is angustifolia, some variation of angustifolia.
Right.
And then like you have the rotocanta, right? And basically that's kind of it, right? And so like we're walking through, and these agaves are massive. Like they're taller than I am. And they're taller than Miguel is, and Miguel's taller than me, right? Like, so they're not like what you would imagine like Espadín from Oaxaca, right? To be, even though they're angustifolia. But we're walking through, and he's like, "Oh, this is this, and this is this," and I'm like, "Yeah, they look the same to me." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, are they like? How do you know that they're different? And he'd tell me some characteristic of like this. You see the way that this Penca does this, or this specific coloration. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, and they like, do they actually taste different? And he's like, oh yeah, they taste completely different, right? And like we're like continuing to walk through the fields, and then like the memory that stands out the most to me is like we stopped, and there was a dead agave, and he intentionally stopped and spent quite a bit of time telling us about how beautiful this agave was. And how it was like the most beautiful agave in the row, like in the estate that they had. And that's why they let it die. They didn't harvest it for production, right?
Yeah.
They let it go to Quiote, and they harvested those seeds so that they can, continue that legacy.
You gotta save the pollinator.
Right. And I was like, amazing, right? And so we finished that up, and then we went over and helped to collect seeds out of dried out pots.
Wow, and then did you bring those home and plant them in your backyard?
Yeah, actually, it's going to be this new Oregon agave spirit.
I'd like to
No,
know.
I didn't bring any of them. But I feel like that's also like a great transition, like in terms of what we've been talking about, right? Like cultural appropriation and appropriating these things that belong to the communities in Mexico or the indigenous communities beyond that. And what does that look like in terms of brands, or who owns these brands? Was it a multinational corporation? Is it a Mexican? Is it an American? Is it a celebrity? Whatever that looks like, right? But I think there's also this growing concern about like biogenetic appropriation and taking seeds from agaves that are endemic to certain regions of the Americas.
It'd be hard to
And then taking them somewhere else and planting them and cultivating them and then producing a spirit that is not within the denomination of origin for tequila or mezcal, or not even within what we culturally know as mezcal.
But that's being done.
It is being done, but
I
is
think, like-
it appropriation?
Oh, to its core. I mean, like that's I don't think it gets any worse than that. I mean, it would be hard to argue that even like a Mexican-owned brand doing sales in Mexico, but then shipping seeds out of the country for then development in South Africa, as an example, would not be appropriating their own culture.
Sure.
And I think that's totally valid. That's
So here's my next question then. Like, what if I'm taking seeds from agaves that are endemic to Michoacan and taking them to Oaxaca or taking them to Durango and planting them there and then producing mezcal with those agaves. Does that cross a line for us or for you? Or is that different?
It feels different.
Because it's in what we now know as Mexico.
Well, more because I feel like that also happens naturally, right?
Sure.
Like there's some pretty high winds that, not to mention just pollinators that are, cross-pollinating agaves across states all the time.
Sure. Espadilla is not endeavored to walk.
Right, exactly.
It made it there eventually.
So it's more of these drastic movements, right? Again, based on intention, right? I don't think that someone that bought a field in a different state across the border has the intention of appropriating the culture. They're trying to take advantage of some land that they have.
Right, but does cultural appropriation have to be intentional?
No. So I would go back to what you said. Like, how do you right those wrongs?
Yeah.
So this bottle, it's interesting, right? Because it's a brand that at least I got to know here, but then found it back in Mexico, and it looked different. Mm-hmm. Thought that was interesting, and it was available there. And I usually, probably similar to you, mostly bring back mezcal in plastic water bottles. So
You have a plastic fetish too? Is that what that?
a little bit. Well, I thought that there was something special about this one, so I kept it in glass.
It definitely tastes special.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate, it took me back somewhere. And I feel like we would be missing such a great opportunity when we're talking about cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation, cultural exchange, to not talk about mezcal culture, or what do we mean by that? Why is this worth protecting? What does mezcal mean to you? Because for me, it's not just like a product with flavors and aromas. And I'm not drawn to keep drinking agave spirits and learn more about agave spirits and share agave spirits with other people just because it tastes good. It makes you feel good. To me, it's so much more than that. Learning about agave spirits and kind of going on my own journey with agave spirits, which started with tequila, which was my first love, and I've never fallen out of love with tequila.
Not even for a night?
Not even for a night. I'm a first generation American citizen here, right? Like my dad's from Guadalajara, and so like tequila was like the natural introduction to agave spirits. And then it grew from there, right? But I think it's important for people to remember that tequila is not the spirit you got drunk on in college, and mezcal is not the bottle with a worm in it. It's so much more than that. And agave spirits across the board represent people and places and a culture. And that's what keeps me coming back. And it's that connection, the idea that mezcal should be shared. And mezcal brings people together. And mezcal helps me to reminisce, right? Like drinking this, talking about this bottle takes me back to my first experience, right? And visiting this place and connecting there and what impact that had on me and my life, right? Or like my favorite thing is like when you pour a mezcal for somebody and they're like, this reminds me of like my grandma's house, right? Or some memory, right? It's like that connection point. What is it drawing you back to that I think makes these spirits so special, and why I keep coming back to them, and I think that they're worthy of protection.
I mean, hard to follow that. I think we were talking about this earlier, where we need to, I think, take a step back before we're able to really define kind of what that means and think about what culture is, generally speaking, or more specifically. And I'd say that it's constantly changing, right? It's not a stagnant thing that we can talk about preserving. And so I think you're right. It's a lot of those things that you're talking about. It's the people, it's the places, it's the memories. But for me, it's a lot about like the history and the indigenous roots that it has. It's sort of history as a product that symbolizes resistance. Because in this day and age, I feel like there's just so little that still feels special that way.
Cool.
Everything being so commercial and commodified, and I think that's what I'm trying to protect is that spirit. So for me, it takes that hard work of going down there and doing that work. And let me add this disclaimer, because probably both of us should. I have a vested interest in agave spirits. I am obviously, maybe not obviously, I am a boutique Mexican agave spirits importer and distributor.
Wait, what? What brands do you import?
Well, I'll tell you later.
I had no idea.
So I do stand to benefit from sales in Mexico in a way where like I don't necessarily, like there's no cost associated with that to me.
Sure.
Right. But I benefit from it because I have friends going down all the time to Mexico, and they'll see our brands on the shelf. They have a good experience. They go on tours at our distilleries or at the palenques, and they see that and they have a nice experience. They have a fun time. They have a story to tell, and I love hearing that. My being invested is not necessarily, doesn't take away from that, but it's beautiful when I get to hear those stories.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Yeah. I think where I have an internal struggle is I love the idea and I want to preserve the history and the tradition of production and small production or certain maybe production processes. But at the same time, I think that the producers should have like the ability to make life-changing financial decisions for themselves, right? And it's like a balancing act. And like, you know, I was raised here, the Portland metro area, and so like if you met somebody who had a family business and then they were acquired by some multinational organization, like you would praise them for being a good businessman and like
A woman.
and like they achieved the American dream, right?
What makes that the American dream?
Or they achieved the dream, right? Like it's you know that like pull yourselves up by your bootstraps is often referred to as American dream, right? I don't think it's exclusive to America, but like you change your life circumstances based on hard work and dedication. And then on the flip side, like, do we hold like traditional producers of agave spirits to a different standard? And I'm not saying like just me and you, but like consumers of these spirits as a whole. Like, do we say like, oh, well, I liked so-and-so's mezcal, but now he produces too much of it, so he's like sold out, and I don't want to drink his mezcal anymore. And it's like, okay, so like what is celebrated in one culture is looked down upon in another.
I don't know. I'd be sure to make, I statements there. I don't know that we can generalize about, others' perspectives on, one producer's life decision or financial decision. But I don't know what I would do. I typically like what I like and ask questions later, right? So I might not ask at all.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
I mean that I have.
Like you like what you taste in a copita, and you ask questions about like production and who owns this and where's this from later,
right?
Or you like production and who owns this and where's this made, and you ask questions later.
Well, I like drinking things that are new to me, right? A new flavor profile, a new agave, and I think that along my journey I've, probably gone through it a couple of times now where I've continued to want to explore new agaves and then come back to Espadín. I'll drink nothing but Espadín for a solid year, and then, I go back on
for a solid year. You've gone an entire year where you only drink Espadín.
I don't know that it got a year, but a few months.
Yeah, I pulled the GS card on that one a little bit. A whole year? A few months?
A few months.
Okay.
A few months.
And I can appreciate it because I've gone through the same process where like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get up on my Espadín soapbox real quick and be like, some of the best mezcal I've ever had is Espadín.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it's not just the agave that should be overlooked. And then like, oh, Espadín's like for novice mezcal drinkers, or like Espadín is
well, that's what I'm
cocktails, or
that's exactly
for cheap mezcal, right? And it's like, no, like some of the best mezcal I've ever tasted has been Espadín.
Right. And I don't know. I'll even stop drinking for a while just so that I can appreciate Espadín again.
Yeah,
well, I don't know where I was going with that, but I think, yeah, I mean, the taste now, ask later is kind of based on that, is that, you're not always going to know the answers to your questions, but if you're presented with something that sounds and tastes interesting, then I might enjoy that. I don't know. It's kind of the ignorance is bliss,
Yeah.
Argument. Can't say I'm proud of it. But most of the time I try to be intentional.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, that when I think about being intentional, I think too often my observation is that consumers, we care more about the way something tastes and smells and what production process is listed on the label, and we care less about who owns this, what impact is this making, how is my purchasing decision impacting the community as a whole, what does this represent in terms of people, place, culture. And I think, there's obviously some intersectionality when it comes to those things. But at the same time, like, are we being intentional about remembering to incorporate that, the culture, the tradition, the impact, or are we just like, this tastes cool, And I think that's like, it's an added value, but to me, it's not the most important thing, or it shouldn't be the most important thing. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes. Like there's this romanticization of certain production methods or certain batch sizes. Does size matter, right? When it comes to the batch of your
does it ever?
And the issue I find with some of that romanticization is, and this is a self-evaluation more than anything, is like, are we also like perpetuating generational poverty, or low yields of mezcal or whatever it is, based on what we think makes the best flavors, versus what the producer wants to do or doesn't want to do? And who are we as just consumers? And this is interesting because when you talked about like the gusto histórico, right? Like, and the feedback that traditionally or historically producers would get from the local community, which is their market, for lack of a better term, right? And then make adaptations to their product based on the market or those that are consuming it. Like, to me, that feels different than like consumers in the United States saying like, well, we like this production method more than that production method, so you should make it like this because that's what we consider to be traditional or ancestral or fill in the blank.
Was there a question there?
No. No.
I was like, I think I missed the question.
It was a self-evaluation. I just need you to affirm my feelings, Fred.
Consider them felt.
All right.
Affirmed.
All right. I think we need La Caminera.
Caminera. La Caminera. Yeah. So, La Caminera.
Like, what are your closing thoughts on this?
I don't know that I have closing thoughts. I mean, I wanted to make sure to share the number that I drew out to share for folks to chew on a little bit, and that's the total production of mezcal, specifically mezcal that's been certified, which according to the Comercam is approximately 11 million liters in 2024, and the 8-point-something million liters of certified mezcal that was bottled for export, and the difference there, which is approximately 3.12 million liters of mezcal. That's what's left in Mexico. So, if you think about it, it's more than double what was exported than what stays in country in 2024. So, do with that what you will.
Yeah.
Did you have closing thoughts? I mean, I like the summaries that you made.
Yeah. I think my closing thoughts are a challenge to myself, a challenge to you, a challenge to consumers as a whole. Be intentional with your decisions on what you choose to drink, what you choose to order, what you choose to buy, because those decisions have real impacts on people, places, and culture.
Bueno, salud. Saludcita.